I would say everybody suffers from the same thing. So everybody has like a neurosis, a love neurosis, because everyone has a story, if we're talking about early childhood, of love either lost or distorted or manipulated. If trauma is on the one hand and love is on the other hand, what trauma will do, or what challenging early childhood experiences do, is they condition our ability to fully love and be loved. So people come in because they're having challenges liking themselves or in their relationships or feeling connected to the world. Everybody has a wound somewhere in terms of love. When we're born into this world, we go through experiences that condition us. Our early childhood experiences frame the way we are in the world, because when we have experiences that are overwhelming, that those create defense mechanisms in us. And actually, when we get to an adult age, what we are is we're a walking pot of defense mechanisms, of coping mechanisms, right? And it's going to determine even the way I perceive other people, the way I perceive myself, the way I perceive the universe. And I would say also that associated to that, then the work of working through trauma is often about bringing things to a conscious level, right? And once things are coming to a conscious level, we can become liberated from those shackles, we can become free from those conditionings, and we can start to act instead of react, and we can start to feel more free in our body and not so armored. In a very real sense, I'd say the first 3 years of anybody's life determine most of the rest of your life, because those are the years in which we're forming our nervous system. It's the years in which we're forming our attachments. And it's the years in which we're forming our sense of self. So according to body psychotherapists, we have different energetic rings in our body that are connected to different phases of childhood development. These rings are located from the top to the bottom of the body, right? And Freud described them in terms of a mental energy, but body psychotherapists connected that to a part of our body and a physical energy. Wilhelm Reich actually defines 5 main ones. And it starts with the ocular ring. And this ring of development is connected to the intrauterine phase. So often people who experience a significant trauma in utero, so as a fetus in the belly, anything from experiencing the mother when pregnant having a car accident, or the mother when pregnant being depressed, or the child having some kind of birth complication, right? This will have an impact on this energetic ring, because this is the ring where most of the body's energy is developing at that phase. Like the energy is most concentrated in that part of their body at that phase of development. And so a trauma creates what's called a fixation of the energy there. It gets stuck, means that it doesn't necessarily travel down to the next rings as a child gets older, because it's still fixed there. It's trying to solve the trauma that it experienced there. Every trauma has what I call the light side and the dark side of the coin. Most of the world's renowned artists have heavy trauma from the intrauterine or neonatal phase, because they have tremendous amounts of energy here. Most artists, most philosophers, most intellectuals, what this will mean is that we have so much intellectual, mental energy that there's a high capacity for creativity, for thinking. You start to see how early childhood trauma influences not only the person we are psychologically as an adult, but also the body that we have in an adult version, right? The dark side is too much mental energy, right? I get lost in my thoughts, I get rumination, I get anxiety, I feel disconnected from my body, right? So that's the dark side there. To deepen this a bit more, the next phase of development would be the oral ring of development. And this is the ring that's very active, where the energy is very rich during the neonatal phase when the baby is breastfeeding, right? Babies are really exploring the world through their mouth. So there's high concentration of energy here. And if they have a trauma at that phase of development, that will mean a stagnation of energy here. The light side is these are big communicators. A lot of therapists have a trauma here. Why? Because when you had a trauma in a phase of essential needs being met, you are very, very good at perceiving what other people's essential needs are, and you're very, very good at helping them meet their essential needs, right? The dark side is a yearning for the needs that you did not have met. And that in the adult version can be like chronic dissatisfaction, or an attitude of insatisfaction with the world because the world didn't actually meet your basic needs when you were young. So these can be people who in a relationship are never satisfied with the other person, right? It's never good enough, or the world is never good enough, or they're never good enough for themselves. This is then the body that shows up to you in psychotherapy, right? So somebody with a strong trauma here might, be a bit collapsed. I could stand up and show you, have a lot of energy here, but also a bit of a collapsed body, lack of energy, lack of vital energy, which is in our pelvis, right? Then there's the trauma that occurs here at the level of the chest, and that's where we develop what he calls the psychopathic character, and not connected at all to being a psychopath. It's just the word he uses for it. So we are going through the ages. This is neonatal. This is kind of when children are just born. Here you're moving into like the 2-3-year-old phase of development, when children are developing their sense of self, right? Their sense of self in relation to the other. And often if a child is traumatized in that phase, and it can even be due to like apparently positive things, right? So say a mother adores her child so much. You're the most perfect little boy I've ever seen in my life. You're amazing. You're perfect. You can't do anything wrong. These are probably experiences that happen many times over the life of the child. It's not one moment that was very traumatic. In being so adored for this false self, he can't actually be himself, and he can't make a mistake, or he can't be a bad boy, right? So then the child starts to learn, oh wow, I can actually be me because I'm so adored for this persona that my mom seems to think I am, this perfect little boy that I'm actually not, right? So that will create usually a big armor around here. And then obviously, working on that therapeutically, relieving that trauma, relieving that energy means helping this person go into their authentic self again, not their persona, not their perfect person that they're projecting outward, right? The shadow side is people that are quite attached to a persona. The light side is that these people are often quite independent people, right? And they're doers. Because they've learned that they can't really trust so much, they actually become very independent. And then after this ring of development, you get the diaphragmatic one. When the child is a bit older, something like 3 years old, and that's when they start to be very aware of their pooping. That's when potty training usually happens. And when a trauma happens in this phase, it's often connected to potty training or something to do with them putting their first gifts in the world, right? And many people experience, for instance, humiliation in that phase of development, or punishment. The development of what Reich and body psychotherapists call the masochistic character. Those are people who then they have a strong stagnation of energy here. Often they're quite bottom heavy legs. And the light side of that one is that those people are often very, very good at enduring. They're often people who carry the load for other people. You get a lot of people with that character, for instance, in professions such as being a nurse or being a serious caretaker. Clear what the light side is of that, massive capacity to endure and take care. The dark side is obviously that they have to do that. Then finally, the last ring of development is the pelvic one, or the genital one, and there we have what's called the rigid character. I don't think I've ever met someone who is a pure rigid character, because nobody's had a perfect childhood where all the energy flows perfectly down. But you do notice is that people who have a block in this ring of development, which is when the child is kind of 5-6, starting to discover their sexuality. Obviously, it's a pelvic theme, right? That those people can have challenges mostly in areas of their life that have to do with sexuality. These are people who are have a lot of vital force. If you go to a party, they're the person who's opening the door and says, "Hi, I'm Manel, and I'm your host today." And they're very connected, and they're very embodied, right? So they're very embodied. They're in their body. They're often fantastic salsa dancers, or, anything that has to do with something purely with vital energy. They can be so developed in their muscular capacity that they can become a bit rigid, kind of like the gabiru, the man that's like all sexual but actually can't surrender to a woman because he's in high kind of performance mode, right? There's a lot of vital capacity, but not necessarily a capacity to be flexible and vulnerable and surrender that. I'd like to say, to emphasize as well, that we all have a little bit of each of these characters, right? Because none of us had a perfect childhood, and all of us had a slight traumatic experience at some moment in these phases of development, because there's no such thing as perfect parents, right? So we all have a little bit of a mix of all these wounds. And then, the healing actually is to create a new environment for those people where they can experience a new form of relationship in a safe space and heal that. But the wound is the same. I would say that everybody's traumas has a similar effect in their body, and even all of these characters have something in common, and that is that everybody has a wound somewhere in terms of love.